So first stop on the new Moto Guzzi, it is the V100 Mandello, and it is really a just absolutely all new motorcycle from them. We're getting a lot more tech. We're getting a sports tourer, I would say, which feels surprisingly like a naked bike as well. Really nice because it's still got that Moto Guzzi character to it. However, the power, quite a lot more refined. The delivery as well. The suspension, really out of this world for the short little bit that we've done so far. And while I haven't really delved into the tech to really any level, and I am just on the base model now, it's a really impressive machine as far as that first impression. Okay, so I've spent 1.5 days on the new Moto Guzzi V100 Mandello, and I gotta say, I've been blown away by just how good this bike is. Now, interestingly enough, obviously this is not an adventure bike, it's not an off-roader, but I feel like it covers most of the road styles of bikes. It's got a bit of roadster to it, a bit of sports to it, a bit of touring to it, certainly sports tourer, and I've just been blown away at how easy to ride it is, how fun to ride it is, how kind of rewarding and confidence inspiring. And while it's a heavier machine, you certainly don't feel that. It carries its weight like a much smaller, sportier machine. It has the comfort of a tourer. It's got the handling of a naked bike and kind of that really good feedback that you're going to appreciate through the twisties, which just makes it so fun to ride. And then you've got quite a good suspension setup on the standard model, which is what I've been riding. I've been quite impressed with that indeed. Great through the twisties. I wouldn't mind a little bit more dive on the forks, but there's adjustability with this suspension system. So now obviously the heart of this particular machine is the new power plant. And so they've kept it somewhat traditional. They have rotated the heads, which is why we see a different exhaust setup running out as far as the headers. However, it is just an amazing power plant. It's got beautiful low-end torque. It's still got that Moto Guzzi character. It's not as pronounced and it's not as rough as the older bikes, which have a very raw, somewhat agricultural kind of feeling and style to them. This has brought Moto Guzzi into the present day, and certainly I think this bike competes with all of the sports tourers that so many people will no doubt be comparing this to. Now, as far as the torque down low, it starts off nice and strong. Obviously, you can knock it up a couple of gears and it'll carry that speed and it'll pick up speed quite nicely off that throttle. The fueling is good. I found sport mode a little bit too aggressive, and the lack of engine braking I wasn't a fan of, to be honest. I preferred road and touring mode, and when we were riding through some kind of snowed on roads this morning, rain mode did the job. And while I wouldn't say there's an enormous difference between those modes, this morning, I would definitely have chosen rain mode, and I could feel just that slightly gentler throttle response. Road and touring are kind of interchangeable in my mind. And then sport mode, I think if I spent more time with the bike and got really used to it, I'd probably do that for the sportier roads. However, to be honest, I just preferred road mode for a little bit more engine braking and a little bit smoother throttle response. Not quite as snappy and not as aggressive as a result. But it's not as big a difference between those ride modes as you'll notice on some of the other bikes where it can be quite a substantial difference. Is that really a problem? No, not at all. I think it's just because the engine is so good as a result of that, the slight changes to the kind of throttle response and the power delivery, just not as noticeable. And yeah, I just can't say enough about that engine. It is an absolute gem. Really nice mid-range. You don't really need to rev it, but if you do, it's got a great top end as well, which is very, very rewarding. And while it's a bit of a struggle these days to find a nice bit of road to properly rev one of these out, if you want to do that and if you've got somewhere to do that, you'll be very, very happy on this bike indeed. As far as the brake systems, we've got Brembos on the front. There is a little bit of lever action before you get the brakes coming on, but it's a nice, powerful brake system. I did find the rear a little bit spongy at the foot lever. There's quite a bit of movement before you get a bit of rear braking. It just means that you've got a softer rear brake setup, but I do like to see the Brembo because it's Brembo, really the premier brakes. You do have Brembo master cylinders. It has got a hydraulic clutch as well, and it's quite a light clutch, particularly for a hydraulic clutch. You do get a bit of feedback through that, which is noticeable, and coming from really only ever riding cable operated clutches, that's something that I did notice. Clunky gearbox, but pretty good engagement. I will say I had to be a little bit careful on the clutch to make sure I had properly engaged it to change gears, because otherwise it won't. Where I'm kind of used to on some of the lighter gearboxes, being able to just give it a little bit of clutch and knock it down a gear. That wasn't quite as possible in this, but these bikes are brand new. They're barely worn in at all. And I will say you also need to be careful on the return of that gear shifter, because if you don't let it return properly, you won't be able to get into the next gear. And that just kind of caught me out. But it's all just part of the bike, part of the character of the bike. Not much of a criticism at all, really. So jumping on the bike for a quick look at the ergos, we do have this nice, comfortable, kind of sporty style seat. Great perch for a pillion as well, which is obviously really important if you're touring on this two up. And that's certainly something that I'd be pretty keen to do on a bike like this. Jumping on, as you can see here, quite an easy reach to the ground. I find the bike quite roomy, to be honest. It's probably not as stretched out as some of the really big cruisers, but at the same time, you're not getting an enormous bike. This is a very, very manageable machine, and 815mm seat height. So really easy reach to the ground, even for shorter riders. And then you've got quite wide bars here, nice upright seating position, great vision through the mirrors, good bit of wind protection from the adjustable screen. And then you've obviously got also the adjustable levers. So as far as the ergos, I'm really impressed with this bike. It's inviting, it's quite, I'm not the biggest guy, I'm about 180 centimeters, 75 kilos, suits me perfectly. And yeah, at the end of the day, I would be very, very happy owning one of these and riding it on the daily, whether that's commuting, touring, or sports riding. Now, I spent less time on the V100 Mandello S than I did on the standard, but did get a chance to test out the up-spec semi-active Ohlins equipped version, which also delivers a quick shifter, heated grips, and their multimedia system, offering smartphone syncing and compatibility. This pushes the price of the bike up from just over 28k right away here in Australia past 32k. So on the one hand, if you're just scraping by to get the base model, this might not be an option, or alternatively, that may seem like a bit of a bargain for the upgrades relative to the overall price at just an extra 10%-ish or so. The quick shifter was welcome as it works both up and down, which makes for a smooth shifting experience, which you can wrangle out of the gearbox with some finesse normally, but is much more thought-free of an experience with that quick shifter. You can also take advantage of the slipper clutch, aggressively downshifting clutchlessly, and I felt this really added to the overall package of the bike. It's just a shame it's not standard on both models. The Ohlins suspension offers full adjustability, which is an upgrade over the rebound and preload on the standard model, and you've got full automatic modes and manual modes which you set up for your rebound and compression settings, and then the system works within a small range of those specific settings for you. The advantage was instantaneously noticeable, better comfort and a smoother ride overall, especially when cruising along. I felt like the advantage was smaller when riding through the twisties, but I've always found there's a period of acclimatization moving from traditional suspenders to the electronic versions, and that no doubt came into play here. And given more time to mess with the settings, I'd probably soften the rear up a little bit. I don't doubt there's a decent, perhaps even big advantage here to the Ohlins, but I was pretty impressed with the standard bike in this arena. Keeping in mind I'm 75 kilos, plus probably about 10 kilos in riding gear and layers for that cold Victorian weather. Those suspension loadouts are linked to your riding modes too, helping make it easy to set the bike up to different conditions and switch on the fly. I will say the heated grips were disappointing. There just wasn't a high enough heat setting for the conditions we rode in, and it wasn't that cold. Hopefully this can be fixed with a software update or similar. They just clearly weren't getting enough juice from the bike. And I think if you really want decent heated grips, if they don't fix this, you'll actually have to replace them, losing all the on-bike integration that the system runs. Now, if the accessory versions are similarly wimpy, and as far as I know they are the same, it's really hard to recommend them. I didn't have time to test out the multimedia system, but I think this is a base expectation for a bike at this price, and perhaps even at the price of the base model. It's also well integrated into the dash, and when you compare the base model to the S while traversing all the settings through that bright TFT, it's noticeable that the base model is missing a lot of these options, making the user interface seem a little bare and empty at times. Overall, I think the V100 Mandello S certainly justifies the upgrade, but at the same time, at least from my perspective, the base model is formidable enough that it's not an automatic upgrade. As far as pricing, value is a fairly subjective judgment, and this category of bikes has seen pricing get very premium indeed in recent years, alongside the adoption of all the new tech and generally higher spec loadouts. The same is true here with the Moto Guzzi, which I think is well capable of competing with the myriad of other options available, but is undeniably a more premium Italian sports tourer that is simply not designed or priced to compete with the bargain basement options, and there's nothing wrong with that. So a huge congratulations to Moto Guzzi. They have definitely produced a bike which I think is going to have much wider appeal than their more traditional offerings, and that's going to bring in a whole new generation of riders. But I also think really importantly, it's going to be a machine that the old Moto Guzzi fans really like as well, and hopefully will also be happy to jump on board on, which is really the best of both worlds. So good job. Go and check one of these out. They are in dealers now. I highly recommend it. Obviously, you want to do a bit of a longer test ride on one of these to really see just how good they are. But if you can line that up, I think you'll be impressed like I have been. Check out the full review at mcnews.com.au. That'll be the full written review. And thanks for watching.